I just felt unconditional love. I felt like I was important. I felt like I never made a mistake. And I was just floating to these gates.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Spirit Travels. Today, we have another guest speaker here. His name is Scott, and he is going to give you his testimony and talk about his experience. And I'll let him tell you. So you can go ahead whenever you're ready, Scott.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. So my testimony, it can be long. I'll try to shorten it. So I was born in Seongnam, South Korea, and I lived there for about 4 years. My parents were in poverty. I don't know a whole lot about that situation because I was so young. But from what I do know, my mother ran away multiple times, and she just left me with who I thought was my dad. It might have been, but he just couldn't take care of me. And so he ended up dropping me off at an orphanage, and I was in a Korean foster home, and then it led to an adoption agency called Holt International, and they're a huge agency that adopt children from all over the world, but South Korea is pretty big. So I'm still in South Korea. I'm in this adoption agency foster home, and I'm up for adoption basically. And again, I don't really remember a lot of this. I think it was just traumatizing to me, so I repressed it. And I don't know how long I was there. It wasn't very long. And then my parents, who are Caucasian that live in Wyoming, they were adopting, and they ran across my file, and they decided that I was the best fit for their family. They ended up adopting me. They have a biological son who's a year older than me, and I went across the country basically at 4 years old to live with them. And that was my first solid memory, was getting off the airplane in Denver with my translator and her pointing out, my mom and saying, this is your new mom. And I just said, no, that's not my mom. And I just started crying like immediately, not knowing how to take that. So the adjustment period was really difficult. I didn't speak the language. I spoke fluent Korean at the time. And just the family dynamic was completely different. I did manage to integrate pretty well into the culture, into the family. I learned the language within a couple months, and I really started flourishing like with this family. And my dad, at the time he was a judge, he was a lawyer, justice of the peace. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my brother and I just were kids, and it was a pretty normal life. Within, I'd say, a year, my parents, they started fighting pretty consistently, and I immediately took it as this was my fault because I was the newest addition, so that's why they were fighting. And so I kind of took that on at 5, and it got so bad, my brother and I would hide in the closet, and they would go at it. I should also say that my father, he has a cerebral palsy, and a lot of what would happen was he would threaten to take my mom to jail, and we just didn't understand really like what the issue was. I found out later that it was my dad had a new secretary that he kind of had his eyes on, and that's basically what happened. And I'll explain that further in the story. So they divorced when I was 6, and that was a nightmare because it was just custody battles, and my brother and I not knowing what side to pick because they were always at each other's throats. My dad moved out, but he stayed in the same town, and then he won custody of us. My mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, she obviously didn't have a lot of work experience, and she just had like this mental breakdown, and she just got very abusive, especially verbally, mentally. She would just put us down constantly. She got us every Tuesday, every other weekend, and for summers. And like I remember just dreading going over there because second we'd walk in, it was, I mean, she was just down our throats. She would shove us into walls. Holidays were a nightmare. I remember one Christmas I went over and she handed me a bucket of cleaning supplies, and she just said, "There's no Christmas, it's canceled. Start cleaning," basically. And I remember that incident. I just said, "No, I'm not going to do that," and I walked out. So that was kind of how I grew up. It was toxic. It was a lot of arguing, a lot of bickering, not knowing basically what we were going to do when we went to our moms, and then going to our dads, and him talking bad about our mom. And so it was a really confusing time. I don't know exactly if I started picking up on these things and letting it really bug me internally, but I remember about the time I was 8 or 9, I started stealing, and I started acting out. And it was just small things at first, change on the dresser, stuff like that, stealing from stores, candies. But at some point, 9 or 10, it started getting more severe, where I was writing checks. I was forging my mom and dad's checks. I was robbing my dad's office. I was stealing basically anything that I could. I don't know, I was just acting out, I guess. So by the time I was 12, I had committed a burglary I was being babysat by a family friend, and I started snooping through their stuff, and I found it was like $1,200 in cash. I'm 12 years old at the time, and I steal it all. And I start spending money. I'm giving money away. Obviously, my parents saw that I was doing that, and the family found out, and they immediately wanted to press charges, which I don't blame them. And so my dad, not knowing what to do, put me in a 30-day crisis bed at a group home. And I remember coming home, and he just said, "Pack your stuff. You're going to this group home." And I was really upset because I just didn't, I don't know, I couldn't understand back then, like, why they were doing that. I felt like they were just trying to get rid of me. And so I took it really personal. And I wound up in this group home. And so I'm thinking, like, 30 days, I can do that. I can clean up my act, and I'll go back home. And so the 30 days pass, and I'm thinking that, my parents are going to come get me. And that day goes by. And so I'm like, well, maybe something happened. And then, another day, at a week, soon it's a month. And I remember calling my dad, and I'm just like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, you didn't come get me after 30 days. And he just said, "Yeah, we're not going to come get you." And so after the 30-day crisis bed, you basically become a ward of the state. And so now I was in the juvenile system under their control, basically. And my parents had lost custody, and I was owned by the state. And I remember at that point, like, I was so angry. I just felt like, why did you adopt me in the first place if this is what this is what was going to happen. And so that 30 days turned into 2 years. And so I was in this group home until I was 14. And this group home, I should say, back then, in those days, there weren't a lot of rules or regulations, and it just kind of went under the radar. So there was a lot of things that they were doing in this group home that I mean, it would be illegal today. One instance was they believed in public embarrassment. We'd have to line out on the highway and sitting in a row of chairs, and they would humiliate us while people drove by. If we were late waking up, there was a creek out back, and they would, in the wintertime, it'd be freezing, and they'd fill up a bucket and they would dump it on us, and then they'd use an air horn to wake us up, and then we weren't allowed to shower. We weren't allowed to change our sheets. So that was just some of the stuff that we grew up with. And so it made me just really resent the system in general. And so after this 2 years, like I just had enough. I was failing in school. I just didn't care. So I ran away from this group home, and I was only gone for like a few hours, and they found me at a friend's house and basically sent me away to another facility. It was just a runaway facility, and I was waiting to go to court for sentencing on that. And I was there for 2 weeks, and then they sentenced me to a military boot camp. And so I went to this military boot camp. I did pretty well there. I found that I did really well under structure. And that place was horrible. I still have nightmares about it, honestly, as an adult. But it did teach me some things. It taught me discipline. It taught me, pushing my body beyond its limits. And so after that, I graduated that program. I went back to that group home so I could transition, hopefully, into foster care. And I did do that. I made it through that group home. I went into foster care, and then I made it back to my dad's house at 15. By this time, when I got home to my dad's house, he pulled me aside and he said, I want to talk to you about this lady that I'm seeing. And I didn't know about it, so it was a shock to me. And I asked who it was, and he said it was the secretary. So the same one that they got divorced over. He ended up marrying his secretary. And so I tried to be happy for him. I didn't know what to think at that point. My brother took it really hard. He didn't even come to the wedding. So yeah, that was odd, moving into a new house with my dad's secretary and him, and trying to start this life over. And it didn't last very long, because within a couple months, I reverted back to stealing and acting out. And I stole some a coin collection of my stepmom's, and it was a coin collection that had sentimental value, and I just took it without even thinking about it. And then I robbed my dad's office again. And I honestly can't tell you like why I was doing these things. I just had a lot of anger in my heart as a kid and as a teenager, and I just didn't know how to verbally explain it to people. So I acted out, and the police got involved. I got sent back to that group home. I was in that group home for 3 days, and the judge decided to send me to a different group home right in town of Powell. And I lived two blocks away from my mom in this group home, and it was a Mormon group home. And I don't have anything personally against Mormons, and I don't want to say that. It's just that they have different beliefs, and I always struggled with God, just because I think that I had such a strange relationship with my father. It was really hard to think of a heavenly father in any kind of loving way. And so I'm in this Mormon group home, and they're trying to convert me. They won't let me go to any other church. And so I adapt basically. And I'm in this group home for 2 years as well. The relationship with my mother at this point was, I just thought she'd gone crazy because she just was not right after the divorce. And so she was really difficult to get along with. And there was a period in time where I ignored her for, I don't know, a year. I just couldn't deal with her. And so after this 2 years in this group home, I'm 17 years old. I get put in a foster home, and it was a great family. I felt like I was robbed of my childhood, of my teenage years, and so I started acting out in ways of like I was drinking. I was going to parties, and I felt justified in doing that because I felt like everyone owed me something. And I mean that wasn't the case. It was just my adolescent mind thinking that. That didn't last very long until they kicked me out, and I got sent to a juvenile prison. And so I went to this prison at 17, and that was the first time that I ever had seen any kind of gang affiliation, any kind of violence, any kind of like lockdown facility. And so that was a real culture shock to me because I grew up in this town of 6,000 people, and I saw other races also other than Caucasian. And I should say that's a huge part of my story. Like obviously I'm Korean, and so I live in a town where there are no Koreans except at Chinese restaurants, and that's about it. And so I really stuck out. But I made it through this juvenile prison, and I age out of the system. I turn 18, I graduate this program, and so now I'm an adult, and I have no skills. They taught me absolutely nothing except how to survive. And they just said good luck, and so I ended up going back home when I was 18, and my dad, he just gave me $500. He bought a little cheap car, and he said, you're a man now, good luck to you. And so I thought $500. I was like, man, I'm rich. So I ended up moving to Montana with a friend, and not having any skills, not having any job experience. I didn't know how to pay rent. I didn't know how to pay bills. I just didn't know how to do anything. So I took that $500 and we just partied on it. I don't know. I think we stayed in Montana for a couple months. It was just a really small town, and that's all that we could do was party basically. And so when the money ran out, we both decided to go back to our hometown. And that first day back home, that's the first time I get involved with drugs. So we do meth for the first time, and I remember just feeling, I don't know, I felt so good after doing it. Like I felt like nothing mattered. My past didn't matter. I was invincible, and I stayed up for like 3 days until I was completely sleep deprived. I was hallucinating, and I had the brilliant idea of how can I get some more money. And so in my delusion, I went and robbed the same house that I did when I was 12. How bad it was like 11 o'clock. I mean, in the afternoon, early, late morning. And I parked my car in someone's yard. I mean, it's daylight. I'm at this house in the country. I'm breaking windows out, trying to get in. And then I finally get in. I go look to see if the money's still there, and it's not. Obviously, it's not. And then in my mindset, I just sat there in that house. And what ended up happening was one of the people came home and they saw me in the house, and they played it very well. I mean, they could have easily shot me if, you know, but they played it cool. They walked me to my car, and that's kind of when I woke up out of it, and I knew, you know, man, I'm in trouble. And shortly after, I ended up getting arrested. So this is my first time in jail now as an adult, and I have a pending felony of burglary. And I remember calling my parents, and they just were like, you know, you got yourself into this. You know, we can't help you at all. And at that time, I didn't understand that. I definitely do now. But I felt like such a victim in all of this. I just felt like you guys did this to me, and now you won't help me out. And it just made me really resentful. And then on top of that, being the only Asian person in jail, I got picked on just relentlessly. I got bullied. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, I was just a little guy. I just survived basically for the next 3 months pending this felony. Finally, they work out a plea agreement and put me on probation for 5 years, but I have to plead guilty to this felony now. So now I'm a felon. And so after that, I just survived basically. I broke the law. I got really involved with drugs, and that was like my only coping mechanism to escape like what was going on. It's hard to tell yourself that, you know, you're an adult, but you don't act like it. To know that you're immature and you probably won't be a success in life. And so I just felt like a giant waste of space. My parents had pretty much disowned me. So I just had people that accepted me, and those were people that were doing drugs and breaking the law. And so that's who I clicked up with. And so I spent years in and out of jail, violations of failing my UAs and catching new charges. And I've been in and out of jail within that 5-year period, probably over 30 times. And there was one case where I had to do a full year in jail on a revocation. So I had quite the rap sheet by the time I was, 21. And this is just the way I lived for years. And then when I turned 22, I'm heavily involved in drugs. I'm selling drugs now. I got really addicted to painkillers, opiates, pharmaceuticals, all that. And that is just a whole separate demon in itself. It's very addicting. And it just kind of took over my whole life. Every day was just how to get more opiates. And it got to a point where I was physically harming myself so that I could go to the ER and try to get some pain medication. And so I ended up getting red flagged at every hospital. And so when I couldn't get any more painkillers, I just went back to meth. And it seemed to work. I could go to meth and transition back to opiates, and that's what I did. And so in one instance, and this is kind of where I have my near-death experience, is I'm 20, or I think I'm 20, maybe 21, and I get quite a bit of methamphetamine, and I'm barricaded in my apartment with a friend, and we'd been using for probably a week straight. And I don't know what happened, but I started moving furniture so it would block me in, so I felt safe, I guess. And I just kept hearing this voice in my head saying that you should do as much of this meth as possible, just right now, just do it all. And in my I guess in my mind, I just thought that that was a good idea. And so I put all this meth on the table. I lined it out, and I just started snorting it. And I don't know how much I ended up doing, but by the time I picked my head up, I immediately, I passed out. So I'm having a seizure on the floor, and I can hear what's around me, but I can't stop the convulsing. So my friend comes and grabs me, and we start going up to her apartment upstairs. And as that's happening, I just feel like my soul is escaping out of my body every once in a while. I can't seem to stay in my body. And I get laid on the couch, and I'm just in a panic. I can't breathe. And I'm looking around me, and I see this dark figure, just the outline of a man. And he was like as high as the ceiling. But everywhere I looked, like he'd be there. He'd be sitting in a chair. He'd be behind a curtain. And so in my mind, I just thought that that was death. This is death waiting to take my soul, basically. And so I'm laying on the couch, and I look up at the ceiling, and I can't breathe anymore. And after that, I open my eyes, and I'm actually up at the ceiling where it's literally within inches of my face. And so I'm not understanding or processing what's happening, but I know that I'm levitating out of my body. And then I kind of put my head up, and everything in the room disappears, and it starts getting really bright. And I start seeing these clouds roll in. And then off in the distance, I see they were like these huge golden gates, and they were closed. But the one thing that I felt, though, like it wasn't scary at that point. I just felt unconditional love. I felt like I was important. I felt like I never made a mistake. And I was just floating to these gates. And I felt like it was just the best thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And so as I'm like floating towards these gates, it finally hits me that I'm dead. And the second I realized that, I just slammed back into my body. And I hit my body, and I sit up, and now my blood pressure's up. I mean, I can't process what happened. But then I look off to the side, and I see that black figure again. And it scared me so bad, I just ran down to my apartment. And as soon as I got to my apartment, every room in my apartment that had the lights off, I saw figures or entities. And the one that freaked me out the most was I went by my bathroom, and I see this guy in the mirror, like standing at the sink looking at himself in the mirror. And he's in a tank top, and he's screaming. Like, I can't hear it, but I see him screaming in the mirror. And then he looks at me, and he's yelling. He's like screaming at me. And then he starts tearing flesh off his face. And he's just like throwing chunks on the floor, and he's just screaming at me. And so I was terrified. So I ran to my bedroom, and I found this little personal Bible. And I had no relationship with God at all. I didn't care to know him. But that was the only thing I knew to do. So I grabbed that little Bible, I put it in my pocket, and I run outside. And it's nighttime. And so I'm on my front porch, and I'm trying to get some air. And I look up, and I see this white bat. It was huge, and he's flying these figure eights in the sky, so I can see it trailing this white figure eight. And I can see his red eyes too, like staring at me as he's flying these figure eights. And I just was like, man, this is hell. Like this is hell on earth. And that figure eight, that figure eight is eternity. Like this is my eternal life, basically, is in this hell. And after that, I just collapse. And my friends call the ambulance, and I get hauled off for, I don't know if it was an overdose. The one thing about methamphetamine that you hear from addicts is that they probably haven't seen a methamphetamine overdose. It's just not something common that you hear. You can overamp yourself, like where you do too much and you pass out, but to actually overdose is, I'd never heard of it. And so I go to the hospital, I'm admitted, I'm put on oxygen. I mean, I'm there for a few days, just trying to get clean, I guess, at this point. Just didn't know how to really process anything that just happened. And you would think that that would be enough to scare me into going down the straight and narrow, but it wasn't. And that's because that addiction to those things, it's just, it has such a hold on people. It's just so hard to let go of. So I get out of the hospital, and I decided to go to treatment, and I put myself into this treatment center. And I'm young. I'm 21 years old. I did not have the maturity to understand what addiction was, what recovery was, what the 12 steps were. I couldn't process it. So I just kind of faked my way through that program, and it was 3 months, and I got out and thinking everything's great. I'm gonna live the rest of my life clean, and I got a job and things were going well. And then I got a call from my probation officer, and they said, we need to meet up with you and tell us where you are. And so I told them where I was, and they sent a sheriff and a bunch of police officers to my job site. And I got arrested with guns drawn on me and everything. And I get the paperwork. I'm in handcuffs. They give me the paperwork, and an informant it was one of my friends, actually. He wore a wire on me, and it was from like a year previous. And so they were bringing these charges up on a large indictment. So basically I was on a indictment, and it was a pretty big one. And I had 8 charges. I had 8 felonies pending against me, all for delivery of pharmaceutical medication. And each one was 10-year max. And then if you get more than a couple, they get an enhancement, which doubles each felony to 20 years. So I was facing a max of 160 years at 21. So obviously I call my parents, and I just tell them what happened. And I just said, I'll never be home for any holidays ever again. I'm going to die in prison. And they were just kind of like, well, you did this, deal with it. And so that's what I was used to. So that's what I did. I was in jail for quite a while trying to fight this case. And they offer you certain plea agreements, and you can say, no, I want to take it. Yes, I want to take it. And the first one that they offered was a 20 to 40 year prison sentence. And at that point I just said, that's life. I won't do it. Like, you can take me to trial. So that negotiation process lasted a while, and then finally they offered a deal that it was reasonable, I guess, at that age. They offered me a 9 to 13 year prison sentence, and I would have to plead guilty to 3 of those felonies. And I just didn't see any other option at that point. So I took it. I signed it. And then within a few months, I was off to prison. I turned 22, and I was going to prison for 9 to 13 years. And so I get to prison, and it's just, the environment is completely different. It's super political. It's, everything is sorted by race, gang, everything, you know. And so obviously I'm still in Wyoming. I'm the only Asian guy really. So where do I go? I didn't really have an option. So I just stayed neutral. And I managed to be okay. And in a sense, all of that time that I was in those group homes and juvenile prisons, the only good that it did at that time was that it gave me an idea of how I should do this, how I should navigate. And you know, when I look back on it now, I'm just like, man, that was God, like, preparing me for what he knew was coming. But at the moment, I didn't see it that way. But so anyway, I'm able to kind of navigate through this. And one of the first people that I run into is this kid. He's 17 years old. He's in an adult facility, and I'm kind of complaining about my 9 to 13 years. And he said to me, you know, at least you have an out date. And so I asked him, you know, well, when do you get out? And he said, I never get out. I have 3 life sentences. And when he told me that, it changed my entire perspective of my sentence in general. I could complain all I want, but there were people there that they'll never get out, ever. And seeing a kid that was 17 like that really humbled me to where I was just like, man, no matter how bad my situation looks, there's always somebody that has it worse. And so that's how I ended up doing my prison time. And what happened was, within 4 months, the Wyoming prison system was overcrowded. So I got sent out of state to a private prison. And anyone who knows anything about private prisons, they're rough, because they contract multiple states for overcrowding. And so I went to Sayre, Oklahoma, to this private prison, and it was 95% California inmates. We had Idaho there too. So Wyoming, Idaho, and California. And this prison was huge, you know, maybe 2,000, 3,000 inmate prison with 2 prison yards. And that system was crazy. I mean, literally people stabbing each other like on a daily basis. Correction officers getting hauled off in helicopters for being assaulted, drug overdoses. I mean, it was just something. It was something. And there's so many drugs in prison. I found heroin in prison, and so that's how I started doing my time. Was I would just do heroin, and I would basically just be intoxicated my entire prison sentence. And that's kind of what I did out of state. When that contract closed, we came back to Wyoming. I was in Wyoming for a month, and then they sent me back out of state. And so then I ended up going to Pocahontas, Virginia. And so I'm going across country on a little bus. And that was the worst experience. Just the transportation there, because you're handcuffed, box cuffed, leg cuffed, waist cuffed, and then cuffed to your neighbor. And that bus ride was 3 days. And they barely gave us water. We couldn't barely go to the bathroom. It was always hot. It was always cold. It was a nightmare. But man, it made me mentally strong, that's for sure. So I go to Virginia. That prison was different. It was fairly easy though. It was a medium facility. It wasn't so gang related. So like I could kind of let my guard down a little bit and relax. And I was only there for 2 months, and then I got shipped back to Wyoming. By this time, I had done maybe 3 years in prison. And then I finally hit a medium prison in Wyoming, and that's where I stay for the rest of my time. And I'm just being a knucklehead for the first few years of that. Um, it's hard to do better there because you don't see a lot of people doing better there. And so if you go off on your own to get educated, to find a trade, to work, people look at you different. And that's the last thing that you want, is to be a target. And so I just followed suit with everyone else for a while. I don't know. I was 27. I only had a few years left on my prison sentence, and I had a cellmate that told me he was going to do the welding program, and I just said, yeah, that's stupid. Why would you do that? It's just a waste of time. No one's going to hire you. And he's like, well, I'm going to get out and I'll have a trade at least. And he told me that I should do it. And I just told him, no, I don't want to do that. It's just a waste of time. And so we made a bet. And if I lost the bet, I would have to join that program. And I ended up losing the bet. So I joined that welding program. And it was honestly the best thing I could have done, because I really thrived in the program. I was a college student in prison. I was getting credits. I was learning a trade, and I was like top of my class doing it. And so I did this program. I work in the shop after I graduate. And so now I only have like a year left on my prison sentence, or a couple left on my prison sentence. And I'm feeling more confident about it. And that's when I kind of felt a shift in my mind, in my maturity, in everything. I saw hope, I guess. I still wasn't connected to any higher power, any God of any kind. I was just riding the coattails of, I have a trade. And at this point, I'm starting to talk to my family a little more. We're starting to build a relationship, because they can hear that there's something different in my voice. And so that they see a little bit of hope too. And so the day finally came where I got to parole out of prison, and I paroled to my mom's house. And so I'm 30 years old now, and I parole home to my mom's house, and we start kind of rebuilding this relationship that was damaged early on. So that transition was extremely difficult. I had just done 8 years straight in prison. I missed out on everything. My whole 20s were gone. When I got arrested and went to prison, I had a brand new flip phone. It was a Razor, and I thought that was cool, just being able to get online and look up ringtones. That was amazing to me. So I get out, and they're at the iPhone 5 or 6. So I had never seen an iPhone or a smartphone. I didn't know what Facebook was. I didn't know what Wi-Fi was. I called it Wi-Fi. Everyone said I need to get data. I just did not know what they were talking about. So it was just this huge adjustment and culture shock that, again, I knew nothing about. So that transition was really hard. I felt like everyone was going to attack me. So like, I kept a pocket knife in my pocket. I could, like, just going to the store it was like doing a full 10-hour shift at a job. It was that exhausting to me just to go to the store and buy something, because now I have a selection of what I can get. And it sounds ridiculous, but when there's 15 varieties of ramen noodles you can get, it throws you into like this anxiety. And so that was really, I just didn't adjust well. I was super paranoid. I had violent tendencies at this point. And so the adjustment period was just, it wasn't going well. with the welding trade, I was like, well, I have this trade, so I know I can get this welding job. My instructor told me, you're doing so good, you will get a welding job. I guarantee it. And so I went to the only welding shop in my town, and they just said absolutely not, because they remembered me from the past. They had read my name in the newspaper, and they just told me no. So finding a job was very hard. And then my parole officer threatened to send me back if I couldn't find a job. And so that was really stressful. At this point, my mom, she was still having some mental issues. So our relationship started getting strained because she was just really hard to be around. And I felt like as an adult, I didn't have to take it. So I didn't really. And so we butted heads a lot. I ended up getting a job at this bean plant, and they gave me a chance, and I loved that job. They didn't pay me barely anything, but man, I loved it. They finally gave me a sense of purpose. And I worked that job religiously for about 2 years. Within that 2 years, I get in a relationship, and this woman was not the best influence. She was a woman from my past, and she had drug issues, just like I did, and she was using and not telling me about it. And when I found out about it, then I went to using too, and so we used together. And I sneak on parole like this until they let me off parole. So now I'm addicted to painkillers again. And also during this, I get her pregnant, and so now we're planning on a child, and neither one of us are ready or responsible enough for a baby, honestly. So we try to get clean. She ends up getting clean for the pregnancy. I am terrified because I don't want to repeat this cycle that has been going on in my family. I didn't know how to be a father, just because I didn't see my dad being one, so I didn't know how to do that. So we end up having my daughter, and man, she was a blessing. But I will say this. The reason I was excited to have a child was because I've heard people say, when you have a child, that's when you know God is real. And I wanted that. Like, I wanted to know that something was real. And I was kind of on a search for that. And so I just kind of put all my cards in this basket. Like, when I see my daughter for the first time, I'm going to know that God is real. And that's not what happened at all. And I hate, it sounds so terrible, but I just have to be honest. But like, I started using again, and that obviously cuts off your emotions to really special things. And my daughter was born, and I remember I held her, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is the moment. And as I'm looking at her, I know this is my child, but like, I don't feel anything. And I hand her back over, and I remember I just walked to the bathroom at the hospital, and I just said, wow, you're something. You don't even have any emotion for your child. And I felt really let down, because I was waiting for that moment and it didn't come. And so then I really felt horrible about myself, because it's not that I didn't love my daughter. It was just that I didn't have this monumental moment of feeling God. And so I just decided then that, God wasn't real. Praying was pointless. He just didn't exist. And I think a large part of that was because I was using meth at the time. And the one thing about meth is it is not a love drug. It cuts every emotion off that you have. It doesn't even make you human. It's just like Satan's drug. It turns you into a zombie, and nothing matters except for that next fix, and you'll do anything to get it. And that's where my mind was at. And shortly after that, my daughter's mom started using again too. And so my daughter was placed in a really bad environment, a dangerous environment, because her and I were fighting just relentlessly over nothing. We had cops come into our house, her getting arrested. It was super toxic, and my daughter shouldn't have been there. What ended up happening was my daughter's aunt took our daughter and put her in her custody, which was by far the best decision possible. The way I took it was, well, now I don't have a responsibility, and because I felt like they took her. I don't know. I was just really selfish. I just felt like they took her without my permission, and that I could get clean if I didn't have my daughter's mom around. And in some sense, I still believe that if she wouldn't have been around, because I did want to get clean. I just didn't know how. So my daughter's gone, and that just kicks off my using even more. And I start cooking meth. I had a friend that cooked it. I learned how to do it. And so that's what we're doing. And so now I'm just using nonstop. And that happened for quite some time. And I remember one morning I woke up and I had a really bad sore throat. It was horrible. And I couldn't swallow. I just felt like I had the flu. And so I went to the hospital and they just said, you have strep throat, you'll be fine. So I said, okay. And I left. A day goes by and it's even worse now. And I have a fever. I can barely get out of bed. I go back. They say, okay, you have strep throat and the flu. Nothing we can do about it. Just go home. So I go home. And then the next day I woke up with those same symptoms, but I had this kidney pain it was horrific. It just felt like I had kidney stones. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't talk. Couldn't do anything. And I ended up going to a different hospital in a different town just to get a third opinion. And they took an MRI of my kidneys just to see if I had any stones or not. And they caught a glimpse of my lung, the bottom part of my lung in this MRI or this X-ray. And they saw like a mass in my lung. And so they did a full X-ray of my chest, and there were multiple black masses all over my chest. And they diagnosed it as a septic pulmonary embolism. So my blood was septic, and I had blood clots in my lungs. And they basically told me, you know, you're gonna die. You have so many blood clots, there's just no way that you're gonna live. But we can transport you to Montana hospital and keep you comfortable until you pass away. So I get ambulance to Billings. I'm in the terminal ward with cancer patients, with people with tuberculosis. Like, I'm in my own room. They put a PICC line in my arm, and it's just an IV tube that enters your bicep and it trails down to your heart, and that's how you get your medications. And so that they basically just pumped me with 4 different kind of antibiotics and Dilaudid and Percocet, and that's what they did for a month. And they were just kind of waiting for me to pass away. But obviously I don't. I start getting better. The blood clots start shrinking. I'm not septic anymore. And I get released from the hospital. And now what had happened was they gave me a prescription of like 150 oxycodone 5s with 3 refills, because they knew that obviously I'd been hooked on pain medication, that I would need to wean myself off. And I definitely did not do that. I just took them all. I was just taking them all, feeding that addiction even more. So obviously I wasn't getting clean. I wasn't getting better. And I was just taking my life for granted. So I am back in this relationship with this toxic woman. I'm toxic as well. My daughter's being raised by, her aunt. And I just see no hope. I see no future. I just don't see anything. I just lived my life this way for a while. A bunch of events happen where I go to jail. My daughter's mom goes to jail. And this kind of starts this lengthy jail stay, and custody issues legally start to happen, which rightfully so. It's a good thing that they did. So I'm in jail. I get some paperwork to sign over my parental rights temporarily, and I decide that I should probably go back to treatment. And so that's what I do. I go back to treatment for a second time. Well, actually, by then it'd been my third time, because I did one in prison too. So I go back to this treatment center, and I end my relationship with my daughter's mom, which was really hard for some reason. I don't know why, but it was hard, and I did that. And for the first time, I want recovery. I want to seek a higher power. I just didn't know how to do it, and so I signed up for this Christian enhancement program with the treatment center, and I didn't believe in it, but I felt like if I put myself into that, maybe I'll hear something. Maybe I'll hear something that will change my mind. And so I started learning about these, post-traumatic stress. I had a clinician that was actually she worked at the prison that I was at, so she was the perfect person for that job, and she worked with me with my PTSD and my reactive attachment disorder, and just all of these things. She was one of the first people that I felt like saw value in someone who was so broken. And so that was just that's what I needed at that time, because I just felt like I was a waste of an existence, of an opportunity, of everything. So I managed to find some value in that. I didn't find spirituality, but I pretended to. And so I graduate this treatment center, and I decide I'm going to stay in the same town that the treatment center is in, because they have a huge recovery community. And I start transitioning back into society, and things are going really well. I'm staying clean. No one knows me here. And I get my first welding job, actually. And I loved it. That really gave me a sense of purpose. And so this goes on for about a year, and I get into a relationship with someone who I was in treatment with on the girl side, thinking that, this is going to be great. We're both in recovery. We both want the same things. And that's not at all what happened. I've noticed that toxic people pick toxic people. And so I picked a toxic person, and she was using behind my back. She was cheating on me every chance she got. And so when I like found out about all these things, it just kind of sent me into this tailspin because I didn't have solid coping skills. And I thought I did, but you never know what you have until you have to apply them. And I knew what I should have done, but I didn't know how to do it. I run my life very much on emotion, and I think a lot of people do. And first thought is always the worst thought. And I would live my life on my first thought. And obviously that relationship went downhill. I relapsed. I can't even say I relapsed because in order to relapse, you have to be in recovery. And I wasn't, I definitely wasn't. So I used again. And I got back in the drug game basically in this new town. And I got fired from my job. I lost everything. I just lost everything all over again. The one thing about my addiction is that every time I use again, it's even worse than it was the time before. You just pick up right where you left off. And that's what happened was I started going into like meth-induced psychosis. I was carrying guns around. I was violent. I kidnapped a guy in my own apartment, threatened him at knife point. It was just all bad. Long story short, I obviously ended up getting arrested. I got barricaded myself into a motel room, and the police came in with guns drawn, and like I was just ready to go. Kill me basically. They get me on the ground. I have a gun in my head, and I go to jail. And so I remember sitting in jail in this new town, and I kind of have this moment, this like epiphany. And in recovery, you hear a lot like, you're not done until you hit the bottom, until you hit your rock bottom. And the problem that I have with that was I could hit my bottom, but I could also redecorate my bottom to make it manageable or livable. And so I just kept doing that. But at this point in time, I kind of took a breath of relief, and I felt that boulder kind of come off my back, and I was so grateful that I was in jail. And I had never felt that before, having gratitude for being incarcerated. I was facing a couple felonies. I knew I was going to prison again, but I didn't care in that moment. It just, nothing mattered other than this is what I need right now. And so I'm in jail, and I remember looking up, and I just kind of put my hands up, and I said, God, if you're, I don't even want to say if you're real, but like, I will dedicate my life to you starting today if you just give me some peace. But I was like, I need to see something. Like, I need to see it, because if you don't show me this time, I will turn away from you forever. I will never talk to you again. I will never acknowledge your existence. And that was the moment. Nothing huge happened there. I guess made my little threat to the God that I was trying to understand. And I did dedicate my life to that. While I was in jail, like, I got a Bible. I had a faith coach from the treatment center that dropped off a Bible that was really easy reading for me, because I didn't understand it. So he got me a real elementary version, and I started reading it. And I started in the New Testament and started reading it, and none of it really made sense, honestly. I started praying every day. But what happened was I found this book on the book cart, and it was of near-death experiences, and it was 90 Minutes in Heaven by Don Piper. And I just thought, well, I'll read this, just to see. Well, that book just kind of changed my life. Like I'm reading this, and I hear the description of heaven, and instantly it brought me back to when I was 18 years old. I overdosed on meth. I have that out of body experience, and I connect the two, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is what I had. Like that means that it's real. That means that heaven's real. That means that God's real. Uh, it just the puzzle pieces just started coming together, and after I read that book, I just had this hunger, this desire to read books like that, and so I found a bunch more. Heaven is for real. There are a bunch of other ones. Raymond Moody, Life After Life. I just kind of devoured those, and I noticed that my thinking just started changing. I started seeing value in all of these little things, even in jail. Like I was so grateful to be able to have a meal every day, to be able to put my head down, to be able to sleep somewhere safe. So like, even though it was my punishment, I accepted it, and I was humbled by it, and I was happy to be there. As weird as that sounds, because I just started seeing these little miracles in my life that were happening. And so obviously I'm waiting to go to court for sentencing. I'm fighting these felonies, and we come up with a plea agreement finally, to give me, it was like a 2 to 4 and a 3 to 5, something like that. And that was going to be the plea agreement. And so I accepted that. And so now we're waiting to go to court. And so I go to court, they present the idea to the judge, like, hey, this is the plea agreement. And the judge says, I don't think I want to do that. And that's pretty rare, actually. If you have a district attorney and your lawyer come up with a plea agreement, for the judge to deny it, it's very rare. But he just straight said, I don't think I'm going to accept this. Because I had been caught with 26 grams of methamphetamine. And he was just real, like, no one brings drugs into my town and only gets like a 2 to 4. And so I was just like, man, I don't, they're going to send me off for another 10 years. I mean, obviously I was really let down. So then sentencing comes, where, we're going to try to finalize and argue for sentencing to see if I can get less time than, 10 to 20 years. And I remember right before I went to court, I said a little prayer, and I said, God, let my words be your words. And whatever happens today, I accept that. And I believed it. And so I go to court. We're in the courtroom. And the weirdest thing happens is the district attorney. So the judge asks the district attorney what she recommends for me. And she stood up, and instead of saying like, yes, we recommend 10 years, 20 years, she actually says to the judge, this is an addict that we have in front of us. And instead of flushing all of his drugs down the toilet, which he had plenty of opportunity to do while the police were coming into his motel room, he kept them, and he had them in his pocket. And it shows how sick he actually is, that he truly believed that he could keep his drugs even while this is going on. And so I'm looking at her like, well, like, where are you going with this? And she's just like, how long are we supposed to lock somebody up for a sickness like this? And so I'm looking at my attorney like, why didn't you say this? She didn't say a word, but I have the prosecutor defending me, basically. And so I'm just kind of my mouth's on the floor. And then finally the judge asked me if I want to speak. And I had something prepared. I had it all written out. And so he lets me read it, and I'm starting to read it. And I just set it down. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel sincere. And so I just started talking. And I don't know what I said. I don't really remember. It was like I blacked out or something, but I spoke. And then when I was done, I felt like this wind just like hit me in the face. And as soon as it did, I started looking around. Everyone else in the courtroom felt it too, because they were looking around too. And I look up at the judge, and he just puts his head down, and he says, "I'm going to go with the plea agreement." It's like, "I'm going to give you a chance." And I was just like, there's no way. I feel like I just witnessed a miracle. So I'm being escorted out of the courtroom. The detention officer asks me, he's like, "What just happened?" And I just said, "I don't know. I don't know." But I knew what it was. I mean, that was God for sure. Giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one. And that's what happened. And so I end up going to prison again, my second time. But this time it's different. I just feel different. I feel like I have God on my side. And I remember in intake of the prison, I read The Shack, and The Shack is, some people like it, some people don't, but I'll tell you why it really resonated with me, and that's because the concept of God and the way the Bible tells it, I couldn't put it together. I needed a dumbed down version of just simplicity of who God is, and the way that book describes God. Yes, it's a black woman, but by the time I was done reading it, I understood what forgiveness was, and I understood that I could forgive myself, and I could forgive my parents, and I wasn't a victim. I created victims, and I needed to live my life better. I needed to be a father. I needed to do all of these things. And I read that book, and I remember reading it, and when I finished, like, I was in tears. It just, I don't know, it just spoke to me so much. So I start my prison sentence that way. I feel like I have a God of my understanding, and he's with me. And I end up going to a minimum facility, and it's fantastic. I start rebuilding this relationship with my dad, with my mom, and I just feel different. I turn down drugs. I turn all that stuff down. I turn away from politics. I turn away from all the bad stuff that I was in before, and my prison time goes by so easy. And I end up doing 3 years. So now I've done 11 years total in prison. I paroled back to treatment. So my fourth time in treatment. This time I have God. So now I'm understanding how recovery is going to go. I understand these steps. I understand these principles. And man, it's just going so great. And the only thing that happened during that time was my mom was diagnosed with vascular dementia, and I could tell that her health and her memory was going downhill. And so I was able to also forgive her, because I knew she struggled with mental illness her entire life. So I get out of treatment. I get into this recovery home setting, transition back into society. I get a job at the YMCA in the weight room, and I'm just doing recovery. I'm going to meetings. I'm dropping these friends. I'm associating with good people, and that's how I start living my life. And I ended up getting another welding job, and it's an amazing welding job, actually. I've never been paid so much in my life, and they gave me chances, and life is going good. And I hate to say this, but I ended up relapsing now. I relapsed. because I was actually in recovery and I relapsed. And this relapse was my last relapse, and it was the worst one by far. Um, Obviously, I'm just being careless, but what ends up happening is I get hooked on fentanyl, and fentanyl is it is killing people. I mean, it's just an epidemic of uh, kids, adults, police officers. People are dying from this just by touching it. But I'm addicted to it now, and methamphetamine too. And what happens is I get some fentanyl, and I have a friend who's also getting fentanyl, and I give him some. I give him a couple, and he was just someone who took things to the extreme. He didn't respect the drug. He just wanted that next high that was just almost near death. Basically, I give him these fentanyl pills, and he has some too. But the next day, I call him, and he's not answering. I try to call him, text him, to say, hey, how's it going? What's going on? And I don't get an answer. And then I'm out doing my thing, and I get a phone call, and they tell me that he overdosed and died. I just blame I just blame me. I was like, that's like, you killed your friend. First thing I did was I called his girlfriend, and I just told her that I was sorry. I didn't know what else to say. And she didn't say she was angry at me. She didn't blame me for anything. but I blamed me. So now I feel like I have my friend's death on my hands, and that threw me in such a. I just felt like the lowest piece of whatever. Just felt like scum, basically. So what I do is after like a month, I just can't take it anymore. So I try to commit suicide, and I take a whole bunch of my anxiety medication, and I just take them all. And so I pass out, and I told a friend about it actually right before. I was just like, I'm gonna do this, and so I did. And she ended up calling the police. Um, she didn't do it till later, but so the next morning I wake up and I'm on the floor, and I'm just super upset. I am so pissed off because I'm like, you cannot even kill yourself. Like, that's how pathetic you are. Uh, so yeah, I was just super angry. And right in that moment when I was like, I should try it again, I get a knock on the door, and it's the police. And they're just like, hey, like, we want to do a welfare check. Someone called. And I just told them, I said, yeah, I just want to die. I don't want to be here. And so they asked if they can take me to the hospital. I said, sure. And I go to the hospital. They Title 25 me, which is suicide watch. And as soon as they did that, I just like lost it. I started fighting. I told the police officer, if you come near me, like, we're fighting. I'm just like verbally assaulting doctors and nurses, telling them, if you touch me, like, I will swing on you. And I was just out of my mind, basically. they talk me down, and I'm in this suicide ward basically. And they give me medication, I sleep it off. And when I wake up the next day, I feel a little better. I'm not suicidal anymore, but like I feel horrible. And they release me basically. And so now I'm supposed to try to live my life with all this burden that I put myself through. And I'm thinking, now I'm going to get in trouble. Like cops are going to come get me for killing my friend, basically. And so I go on the run. I get a hotel room and I hide. And I don't know what I'm doing. I'm drinking, I'm using, I'm just trying to disappear, I guess. So I'm on the run. And long story short, was that they weren't looking for me at all. But now I'm thinking that that's what's going to happen. At any day, they're going to come get me, and I deserve it. I absolutely deserve it. And at this point, I'm talking to my deceased friend's girlfriend, and she's like, "Look, this isn't your fault. Like, I don't blame you. He had his own pills on top of yours, and it took one. It was one pill with methamphetamine, and he mixed them together, and that's how he OD'd." And so now she thinks she's going to get in trouble too. So her and I are just like, we're scared. And she's also a believer in God, and like, so her and I are like Bible studying kind of together, just praying for each other. And I had some really good people in my life at the time too that were really supportive, and I started going to meetings, and I was trying to get off the drugs for good, and I do finally get off of them completely. And we're just waiting for the cops to come basically, and her lawyer says, we're just waiting on the death certificate to see what the cause of death was, and that will tell you everything. And basically she gets the certificate, and it says that he died of a methamphetamine overdose and that it was accidental. And to me, that I was grateful, but I felt guilty all at the same time, because again, I had heard that you can't die from meth. And definitely nothing was intentional. But that's the mix of the two, that's ultimately what killed him. But they ruled it a methamphetamine overdose. And so, the cops weren't even looking for us at all. And then in previous podcasts, I said it once, and I said, like, I felt like that was a miracle, but I got some pushback for that. I don't want to say that I deserve that. I don't want to say that it was a miracle. I don't even know if it was a chance. I don't know. I've had so many. I don't deserve them. But whatever it was, it changed everything. I felt like he sacrificed his life so that I could live, and I wouldn't change my life until I saw something like that happen. And that's kind of what changed everything. And one last thing that happened was I was about a month in on my sobriety, and I remember it was a Wednesday, and I get paid on Wednesdays. And my deceased buddy's fentanyl connection actually reached out to me on Facebook, and he said, "Hey, I have a great deal on these fentanyl pills." And in my mind, I was like, "Man, you are sick. But then my other part of my brain was like, well, you're getting paid tonight, so this might work out. And so I go to a meeting, a 12-step meeting that I'm a part of, and I'm going through this meeting, and I have this in the back of my head about what this dealer said. And as I'm leaving the meeting, I know that I'm about to get paid. It's going to hit my bank account any minute. And the thought crosses my mind, like, you can get paid, you can go get some fentanyl and you'll be fine. So as I'm walking to my car, this lady stops me. She was in the group, and she runs over to me and she stops me, and her and I don't talk. She's fairly new to the town, and she's like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay, what's up? And she's like, this is gonna sound extremely weird, so just hear me out. She's like, your friend spoke to me in a dream. And at this point, I hadn't said anything. I didn't want to talk about it. So not a lot of people knew. And she said, he spoke to me in a dream, and he said, will you please tell my friend Scott that he's going to be given an opportunity to use again, and that if he does, then he'll die, and he'll be with me. And obviously I told her, you're not going to believe what happened earlier today. And so I told her, and I said, his connect actually reached out to me saying that there was some fentanyl available, and I was really considering it. And she just said, well, there's your warning. Now I don't know if it was real. I don't know. I believe it is. How does that happen? She named him by name. She doesn't know him. But I got clean after that. Let's just say that. I got clean after that. And my life is great. I've been clean now for 16 months. I celebrate my friend every day. I pray to God every day. And that's really my testimony.
That's amazing. Wow. You went through a lot, Scott. Oh my gosh. Do you know how many times
Yeah.
I wish I could reach through this camera and just like give you a hug and just be like, oh my gosh. That story is like, that really hits deep, man. And I just want you to know that like you are so valuable. You're so precious. You're loved, even by people you don't even know. Like, dude,
Thank you.
I was trying not to cry. Sorry, I was like, oh my god. But wow. And you have like this incredible introspection and this humility and this like this heart that like I don't know. It really hit me. Your story was really hit me like deep.
Thank you.
So first of all, thank you so much, because that's so it's such a deep personal story. Like it's really intimate, the story that you just shared. So
Yeah.
for you to be that vulnerable and like share all these really difficult times in your life, like a lot of people can't do that. And I'm just really grateful that you actually even came and talked to me and shared your story. That's like, wow, you went through so much. Like as you kept going, I was like, okay, now it's gonna get better. Okay, now it's gonna get better. Okay, now it's gonna get better. I'm like, oh my gosh, how much can one person go through? You went through so much, and I just like, I know that all that you went through, there is a reason for it. I know that's hard to hear, and it seems like a throwaway statement, like, okay, whatever. But I truly believe that, because honestly, I don't know many people like you. I don't know many people who could go through something like that and have that kind of introspection about them, and like as you were talking through different moments of your life, I don't know if you saw it, but there were moments of like hope, and even in these dark moments, just by the way you were acting, I don't even think you did it consciously. And I was listening to you and I was like, wow, that's like God is doing something with you. And Yeah, dude, your heart, like I was thinking of you and thinking of what Jesus says and how he uses people in this world. Um and yeah, I wish I could give you a hug and give you a virtual hug. Okay. Um yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I was just writing down some questions, like some specific and some a little bit more general, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Okay, the first one is, it's about your group home setting, and I know you went to a few group homes.
Yeah.
Now looking back at it, because I feel like if, like, that could cause a lot of resentment and anger and stuff, especially in your parents, right?
Yeah.
um, I have a father who also like rejected me and left me, so it would be very easy for me to like hold on to that and be angry, but I can tell that, again, you have so much like wisdom and introspection about that time and your parents and grace for them, even though like what they did was kind of awful. It's, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be honest, you know. um so now looking back at that, how do you feel about that? How do you think it like shaped you? What do you think of that time now?
So, like I said, at the time, I didn't understand it. I felt like they just rejected me. I felt like my adoption was pointless. Going through all of that, though, in the moment, I hated it. I didn't get it. But like I said, once I got to prison, I looked back on it and I was like, that's why I went. That's why I went through all that because it prepared me for this. So I got to prison and I wasn't, they call them a fish. It's like a goldfish, like in a pond, like, you're not a shark yet. But it taught me like how to navigate through this, who I can associate with, how to act. And because there's so many little prison rules that like it will get you killed just like looking in someone's cell at the wrong time.
Wow.
Slamming your door, tapping your razor on the sink. Like there's so many rules internally that like if I had not gone to those facilities, I wouldn't have known about respect. And that's what prison is. It's a respect game.
Wow. Wow. Well, that makes sense. And I think it's really cool that you see that, like that you actually realize that. Um, you also mentioned at one point, I think this was right when you were having your near death experience, that you went to get a small Bible that you had. Where did you get the Bible from?
So I had the Bible from the first time I was in jail. There's a little those little personal Bibles of the New Testament, and I don't know why I grabbed it honestly, but I took it home with me. I think I was putting addresses in it or something, and I just had it in my room, and it was there. It was available when I needed it. I didn't open it, I didn't read it, but I grabbed it because it felt like protection to me, and I put it in my pocket like a wallet, and I mean I truly believe that it saved me. I do like to say this, so like with my testimony, like there's a poem, and it's Footprints in the Sand.
Yeah, I love that one.
That poem, like
So good.
it just reminds me of my life. Like I'm walking down this beach thinking that I'm alone and like I'm experiencing life asking like where is God in all of this? And then today I look back on everything that happened and I'm like that wasn't me walking. Like I was being carried the whole time.
Mm,
And so
amen.
like when I
Preach.
put that together, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, like I've never been alone this whole time."
Yeah, totally. And I know it feels like you're alone in the moment, but it's like when you look back, you're like, wait a second, no, actually I wasn't alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned a black figure that you kept seeing too.
Yeah.
Um, were you seeing that figure before you crossed over, or was it something, because I know like some people talk about when they come back then they see like the spiritual world or something like that. So is this something that you saw before, or only after you came back?
Yeah, so I'd never seen it before until I was near that near death. Like within a few moments before, that's when I really saw it. And even after, it felt like it attached to me, because there was one moment in particular, like it was like a year after that, and people have those sleep paralysis dreams. And I don't know if they're dreams or not, but like I came home from work and it was daytime. I put a curtain up and a blanket over the curtain, and it was like 4 o'clock, and I was just laying down. I was in the dark, and I felt pressure like on my bed, like something was crawling onto my bed. And then I felt the pressure on my chest, and then I felt like hands coming around my throat, and it was shaking me. And so I was shaking like violently, and I'm awake, and I look over, and there's that figure, and I can see it. I'm in a black room, but I can still see it, and it's all the way to the ceiling. And it just like started like following me like everywhere I went, and it would just choke me out at night. And
wow.
just,
And what made it stop? What stopped it?
What made it stop was that I got to a point where I quit fearing it, because it was happening so much. I was just like, man, if you're gonna kill me, then you just go ahead. And I quit fearing it, and then it went away.
Wow. This is a side kind of question. Dealing with all of this stuff and going through all this kind of trauma through your life, and then like finding your faith and finding Christ and all that stuff. Were you ever prayed over, like have a deliverance prayer or anything like that?
So this happened after my second time in prison. When I was transitioning back into the community, I was in this sober living home, and I was in this room. My bedroom was like the size of a closet, or the bathroom. It was tiny, and I would always feel like this really evil thing in there. And I remember telling my faith coach at the time, I just called him one day, and I was like, hey, like I'm really struggling today. My room was freezing. I didn't have a heater. I didn't have anything, and I was just freezing in there, depressed. And that day we went to his families, and they did pray over me, and like I was in tears. They were in tears. And then I did find out later that someone like a year before had shot themselves in that bedroom, like committed suicide in that bedroom. And that was the same bedroom that I tried to commit suicide in.
Whoa. So there was like something demonic attaching itself to that room, it sounds like. Yeah. Do you believe in like the demonic things, like those kind of things?
Absolutely. I believe that drugs are Satan's like weapon, honestly, because like the second you use meth or drugs, it cuts that spiritual connection to God, and it just makes you vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that they're very prominent tools that he used. So some of these are going to be a little bit more specific to the actual out of body. So one of them is, and this one I ask almost everyone who comes on here and talks about near death. When you experienced yourself, like when you left your body, and then you mentioned that you were kind of like on the ceiling, and then everything kind of turned bright, and you saw clouds, and you saw gates and stuff like that. Were you able to still see, hear, or feel the people who were on Earth, or were you like completely somewhere else and you couldn't feel them?
No, I had no. Once I was at the ceiling and things started transforming, I had no connection to Earth. I didn't remember anybody.
Cool.
It's just in that moment you just like, and everyone says this, but you feel that unconditional love, and that is very real. Like you just feel like you're the only person who's ever been created, ever existed, and you have no sin. It's just like it's perfect. So you don't remember anything. And so I don't remember why I thought that I was dead, but as soon as I did, it just slammed me back.
Were you disappointed when you came back? Were you upset?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was upset because I went right back into this miserable existence, and I had this shadow following me, and then obviously I was seeing weird entities ripping their faces off. So that,
yeah, that sounds pretty upsetting. to go from that
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can understand. Okay, so I have kind of a two-part question,
Okay.
which is, what would you say is the most, I guess, surprising revelation that you learned from all of this? And what would you like everyone else to know?
The most surprising. I mean, it's really what we just talked about. I had read that poem so many times. I had heard it in Bible study. I'd run across it just on the internet, and every time I read it, I was just like, "Gosh, this is so dumb. Like, this is a lie." Um, and it wasn't actually until recently, until like a year ago, that I ran across it and I read it again. And when I did, it was just like a flashback of everything that had ever happened. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this poem is my poem. This is me. This is us. This is everybody that truly feels like they're walking alone.
Yeah.
Um, and it just made everything seem worth it at that point.
And have you
Um,
ever seen the Lifehouse skit? The Lifehouse skit?
ah,
If you have
no.
not, when we finish our conversation, go to YouTube. It's a really, really old, but go to YouTube and look out the Lifehouse skit. It's like a little 1 minute kind of, or I don't know how many minutes, maybe 5 minute, like little acting thing to music that they do. But every time I watch it, I start bawling. And I feel like you will appreciate it. If anyone
I
appreciates it.
did. Is that one I did still? I did see this play reenactment, and I will say this: I cried every time I watch it too. But it's like a play where it's like this woman and there's Jesus, and he's like they're like dancing together, and they're
Yes,
like
it's that one.
yeah, and then like all these things are attacking her, and he's being held back, and he's just oh man, that one messes
Yeah.
me up every time I
Yeah.
see it.
Like she tries to fight all these things off and she just can't. And so Jesus like no,
Yeah.
holding everything back. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah, that one gets me every single time.
yeah, yeah, that one was a good one. I like the message of that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, and then you were, I think I cut you off, but what did you want everyone else to know? Like, what's the lesson that you think would be a great takeaway for everyone listening to your testimony?
My lesson is just that, man, this earthly world I mean, it's full of destruction. It's full of hate. It's full of trauma and scars and I just want people to know that there truly is hope. The Bible says, reach to God like with all your heart and with that childlike faith. And I feel like people as they grow up, we forget to do that. We start looking at logical facts. We start believing in science, and science is great, but um, like God is with us, and He doesn't want us to suffer. But the suffering is what changes people. Pain is what kind of molds us into these people that God wants us to be, and we couldn't be there without suffering.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get stuck in just the depression and just in feeling worthless. And um, there's a lot of things, a lot of influences today that like make you insecure and make you feel like you're not really a part of anything. But like, man, I would just say like you're a part of God, you're a part of heaven, you're a part of that family. Um, and life is good, man. Like if you really want it, like it can be good. And I do want to say this, like from my story to where I am today, um, like I said, I have an amazing welding job. That prison thing I'm glad I lost that bet. Um, so I have that. I have a healthy relationship. We actually take care of, we work, or she works for a company and I part time with this company where we have clients with disabilities. Like I help them find employment. I am a sponsor with, the 12-step community. I go back to that treatment center that I went to so many times. And now they're the ones asking me, like, how do you do it? How did you do it? and so it's been like also I moved my mom out of her situation, and I took power of attorney. I have full control of her finances, her medical, and I moved her to where I'm at, and so she's in this community, and now I take care of my mom, and I've been able to do that in 16 months. Like that was my 5-year goal, really, when they asked me. So I've accomplished all this in just a short amount of time, and it's not me at all. Like this isn't me. This is God.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so encouraged to hear how well you're doing, and I definitely want to pray over you. We don't have to do it on camera. I'll stop the recording and then I'll pray over you. But
Okay.
I would love to, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
And I love where things are going, the trajectory in your life, and I hope that you just continue getting better and better, which I know you will. And yeah, I like, that's awesome. And I love what you said about that there's hope and you're part of a family, because I think we forget, right? Like especially on earth, like we are spiritual beings, but we forget when we're on earth. We get distracted.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and the devil's a liar, dude. He lies to us all the time. Telling us, you're not worthy, you belong to me, you're nothing. Just tell him to be quiet in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I appreciate so much you sharing everything with me, Scott. I'm going to end the recording here. And then if that's cool with you, I would love to say a prayer over you. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to end the recording here. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification. And if you have an NDE that you'd like to share, you can email us at travelsinthespirit@gmail.com. God bless.